This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hiya, just a really quick message from me. I'd really love to ask for a little favor from those listening and watching. So wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching on, whatever platform it is, please do hit the subscribe button. This really helps the Voice of Early Childhood to continue putting out those thought-provoking episodes and continue making sure that we share those diverse voices and give you the topics and guests that you want to hear from. And for those of you who already subscribe, thank you very much. This helps so much. And everyone, thank you for listening, watching, and supporting the Voice of Early Childhood.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast in partnership with Male, Childcare and Teaching Jobs. My name is Stuart Cloak and I'm your host for this episode. On this episode, we are discussing the importance of physical development and why it's such a crucial topic to be discussing at the moment with Josh Candy, who is the founder of Early Years PE. He has been a guest on the podcast before, so it's a pleasure to have Josh back. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thank you very much for having me, Stuart. It's a pleasure to be back on again. Good to be talking about something a little bit more kind of down my realms, as opposed to last time I was on was a lot more about sort of my journey, kind of where I've come from. But yeah, good to be discussing a very important topic, which is close to my heart and something I'm extremely passionate about.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think at the moment, there's a lot of stuff out there around physical development, the importance of physical development. So it'd be really good to kind of get your thoughts and opinions on that. But for anyone who has not come across your work or has not listened to the previous episode, can you just give us a little bit of a background of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. I primarily have a background coaching football, and I got a degree in secondary physical education. I've worked in the primary sector, secondary, and 8 years ago now, I had the opportunity to work in the early years as a sports teacher. I put that quote unquote, is what the job title was branded as. And I saw that as quite a good way as a stepping stone into kind of what I wanted to do as a career. At that time, I was a bit unsure. So I thought I'd throw myself in, start the early years, having absolutely no idea what the early years world was like. And when I say no idea, I literally had like no idea what the early years world was like. And 8 years later, I'm still here. I'm talking to you now. And in April of 2024, so April last year, so nearly a year now, I took the quite big step into starting my own company called Early Years PE. Does what it says on the tin, really. And just to make physical education in the early years sector more accessible, more known. I've been on that journey of kind of making it more accepted, let's say, and it's been a fun journey. It's been a difficult journey. It's been hard. I've learned a lot along the way. So yeah, I think it's very important to understand that I'm not, in terms of physical activity, physical development, everything I talk about, everything I've done has been learn on the floor. Experience is where I kind of lie. I'm not particularly well read on all of these topics. I've not kind of got a doctorate. I've not been to uni and done my masters and all this, that, and the other. But I feel like it's the experience that I've gained in the early years world has kind of equipped me well enough to understand the industry, especially along the physical side of things, with my background in PE. And yeah, just encompassing it all together is kind of where I'm at now, and this journey's only really just begun.
Yeah, and it is a really good journey. And, you know, whilst you don't perhaps have that kind of academic side of the background of what you do, you have that really important lived experience, and you've seen the struggles, I suppose, that settings educators and practitioners have had in kind of really understanding the importance of physical development, really. So yeah, no, and I know there's lots of opportunities coming up for you this year for you to be able to speak about what you do. So it's great that you kind of have been given that opportunity too. So we'll get straight into the episode then, and obviously, a lot of the stuff that we talk about in the episode today will be featured in Josh's article as well. So make sure you do go and read that, because it is a really good, detailed insight into everything that Josh is going to be talking about in this episode. And one of the things that I think is a really good point to start off from is I've read through your article, and it was really interesting to see how you're trying to move people's mindsets away from, I suppose, what's being termed as a checklist mentality. And it's very easy, I think, for parents and educators to get caught up in viewing physical development as a check list of like milestones. Can they jump? Can they crawl? So I suppose, talk to me a little bit about that, really, and why you kind of put that in your article, I guess.
I think it stems back from when I first entered into the early years world. As I said, I was employed as a sports teacher. The nursery, it was under a different ownership back then. They already had a sports teacher working for them at the time, and there was no real prompts for them to go by. It was kind of free. It was open for them to kind of do whatever they felt fit.
Mm-hmm.
There was lots of fun games. It was lots of good, what we would call as physical activity games, but there was nothing really that we were being told we have to do this, or we should be doing this, or let's try and target this. It was so open, which is where I think that's where I fell in love with the job, is because it was so free and open. Like I said, I've done the secondary, I've done primary, and I felt it was very restricted in terms of what was open to the teacher, the educator, to be able to do. Very lineal. You have to, although, okay, we're doing a form of maybe football. Okay, fine. But you have to make sure we're hitting this, or we're hitting that, or we're doing this, doing that. And I felt like the early years didn't have that kind of, this is what needs to be done. So I was interpreting the lessons that I was putting on, and the games and the sessions that we were doing based on the children and the children alone. I got to know the children more than some of the practitioners would from a different perspective. I was seeing them outside. I was seeing them playing, interacting, socializing, not in like that classroom facility, but an outdoor facility. So where I got to really know those children, I kind of wanted to push a little bit more, like what more can we do? And it wasn't until COVID that hit, so back in maybe 2019, 2020, that I started to explore more into the early years realm of what are other people doing? Like, what's the need? What's the desire? What's the want for anything physical in the early years? And I was really struggling. The only things I could find were that physical development and the physical activity. But again, all of that was seen from what the EYFS tells us in, can a child do X, Y, Z? Can they crawl at a certain stage? Then can they walk? Can they climb stairs? Can they navigate a space? Can they kick a ball? Can they catch a ball? And I looked at it and just thought, if you walked into any setting and you walked into a preschool room in a garden, every child's doing all of that. And kids will naturally, if you put a football in front of them, they're naturally going to pick that ball up and they're going to do something with it. They're not just going to stare at it and think, oh, well, what's this? They're going to do something, whether they sit on it, whether they roll on it, whether they kick it, throw it, whether even the babies, we know what the babies are like. If they pick up a ball of any kind, the first thing that's going straight into their mouth, they're exploring, they're doing something with it. And I think it's so easy for practitioners to see these activities happening and then relating that back to what our checklists, going back to checklists, the checklists are on the EYFS, and saying, oh yeah, my child's doing that, or they're doing this, they're doing that. So then my kind of going into exploring that realm was, so then what more are we doing? Yes, a child can kick a ball, but then what are we trying to get from that? What are we trying to teach? What are we trying to learn? So then that's where obviously the PE side for me just fitted in so perfectly. So if we are, I teach all of my sports now on a 6 week block. So we're giving children opportunities to learn different sports, but not so explicitly. Like we do a lot of experimental and explorative, imaginative play
Hmm.
where the children don't necessarily see what they're doing firsthand, but I can see if I try and introduce football. Yeah, I can tick that list of the child can kick a ball, but there's God, so many more. There's so many more things that child is doing within that. Can they kick a ball? With what purpose? What intent are they trying to go for? So I think for me, that's the yes, we're all hitting that tick list and physical development. That's why it goes so under the radar. That's why it's not
Mm.
focused on really at all, because it's so easy to be that checklist to be hit, those milestones to be hit. And it seems the only milestones that aren't being hit are the children that aren't at that level of their development at that time. And yeah, they might get focused on, but then what about the rest of the children? Just because they've hit that particular checklist,
Mm.
what happens to them then? Do they just, is that fine? Is that okay? And I think that's where the problem is when we come to primary schools. The children who, we have all this problem about children not being at a certain level when they go into primary school
Mm.
physically. Are they not ready physically? Um, is that why? Is because we're not exceeding what they possibly can do when it comes to anything physical in early years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're really, really interesting points and definitely kind of areas that we need to kind of dive a bit deeper as a sector into. And I think you've touched on some really pertinent points of seeing physical development through the lens of the unique child, I suppose, is what you're saying, really. And it's not just a tick box mentality, and it isn't just outcome driven. It's definitely seeing it more as a journey and a process, I suppose. And as you said, seeing it through that unique child aspect, it allows children, I suppose, to carry on their journey, even if they've hit those developmental milestones for their age group. Like you said, they should still be given the opportunity to kind of really foster that love of being active and physical, because as you said, it's innately in everybody that movement is just an inherent part of being a human being. Everyone moves in different ways and everyone makes decisions, I suppose, around where they go, how they get there. Do they run? Do they walk? Do they crawl? Do they have to climb? So I suppose what you do, which is really good, is really promote the agency of those children being able to kind of just be creative in achieving those outcomes, but in a much more relaxed, easy way.
Yeah. I mean, we as practitioners, we as educators, we should, I'm not saying it always happens, but we should, with all our children all the time, be looking for any learning opportunity there is. So if you do
Mm.
have a group of children in a garden and there is a ball, there is so many. And I think I said this in the last podcast, that when I say there are hundreds of opportunities with a ball, there are literally hundreds of opportunities with a ball. So we should be, I guess then it comes down to the practitioners, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later. But excuse me, the practitioners may be feeling ill-equipped or not confident enough in themselves to be able to do
Mm-hmm.
something. But I think, yeah, the opportunity that we have to excel those children more. There are going to be children who are far more active than others, of course, but we're not just going to focus on the children that can't do to try and get them to that point of, okay, let's just make sure they can do the bare minimum. We've got to be looking at every child thinking, what can we do to push and excel them to make sure that they are thriving.
Mm.
And yeah, that's the way that I like to teach it, is because that does sound quite strict and quite structured, but I think that's where you get to know your children, and we all
Mm.
should, as practitioners, we all should know all of our children that we work with and we look after. We know what they're capable of doing. If we can push them that little bit more to try and get something out of them, then that's only going to benefit them in the long term.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the more agency and opportunities we give to these children, and I think in the modern world now where there is so much, emphasis on children being plugged into screens and devices, and children are moving less and less and becoming more and more sedentary, even on school runs and weekend trips to the supermarket. Everything is kind of load into the car, off you go. Children aren't given lots of opportunities to move, I suppose. And I suppose that links into something you touched on within your article, which I had never really considered, but the importance of the environment when it comes to physical development. So I think, when we look at some of the environments, even in our early years spaces, children are encouraged and almost dictated a little bit to sit down more and more and to kind of sit still and cross your legs and, sit down over here, grab a chair for this. And I think, really, are we fostering that kind of supportive environment for physical development by constantly having quite a restrictive environment?
I think every environment has opportunities, no matter where it is. And yeah, there are times where sitting down is perfect, is ideal. I mean, I have elements of my lesson at the start of every one of my lessons where we have the children sat down in a group. I never, and again, this is all what I've learned. I've never told a child to make sure they sit down with their legs crossed. I just tell the children to come and take a seat on the
Mm-hmm.
mat. How they choose to sit from there is completely up to them. Um, and again, I think it's just making sure that whatever environment you have, whether it be a room, a small room, a little back room, maybe uh, a garden space that's either very, very large or very small, or a garden space which has loads of equipment in, or a park, wherever it is, there are opportunities there for movement, for physical development, for engaging the children in a different way that they are. It's just a matter of being creative, and I think there's a lot of restrictions that are put on ourselves as practitioner educators to think that we can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with my job, if it's pouring of rain outside, if it's really, really muddy and flooded, I don't have the luxury to turn around and be like, do you know what? We're not going to do anything today. We're going to stay in, carry on, do some
Mm-hmm.
colours. I have to try and think of a way to adapt and change sessions. And I think that again, that's come from learned experiences. There's ways of doing sessions that don't necessarily have to be 100% movement. We don't expect 100 mile an hour from the children, but actually, how can we engage them in a physical way that's slightly different? So especially over the last few months, I've been doing rugby.
Mm-hmm.
Weather has not been great.
Mm-hmm.
Parks have not been great. There's been puddles. I could have probably done a swimming lesson better than I could have done a rugby lesson at the parks lately. But we've been having to bring those lessons, some of them inside into the rooms. And I've still managed to teach a whole 6 week block of rugby in a room. There's one nursery I work with at the moment, fairly small, like your average size room of a nursery.
Mm-hmm.
Sand pits around. There's a home corner. There's a construction area. There's bits and bobs everywhere. The practitioners in the room know that I'm coming, so they just sort of clear everything to the
Mm-hmm.
side. I've got sometimes 19 to 20 children in that class in a room where they would normally be at the park, and we've managed to do everything from in rugby, how to hold the ball, how to move with the ball, scoring tries, avoiding contact, learning what a conversion is and how to kick the ball properly, along with having all the free time at the end that we can. So there's not really an excuse to say that you can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, what is the intent and how can we make that happen? Regardless of the environment that we have, what can we do to stimulate these children in a way that's going to really benefit them? And I think that's where that gap sort of lies, and that's where I try and fill that gap. But I understand that it's not something that the luxury that a lot of people have. So
Yeah, and I think you touched on some really interesting points there about environment and risk specifically within environments, indoors and outdoors. And I think, children are growing up in such almost a risk-free environment. Everything is risk assessed to within an inch of its life, and everything is checked and removed if it's dangerous. And of course, we have to have risk assessment in place, and it's important that kind of unsafe and avoidable risks are removed. But I suppose we need to allow those children in any physical element that they're doing to take managed risk, to take age appropriate risk. If they climb and they fall, they'll learn to climb in a different way. If they drop something and it hurts them, they'll learn to hold it in a different way. So I suppose in its simplest form, it's all about just making sure appropriate managed risk is available to children in order to build that courage and that resilience and that wider skill set.
if you look at physical development or the physical as you would any other subject, whether that be, let's take maths for example. If a child gets a question wrong in maths, they don't just stop doing maths. They
Yeah.
learn, and they'll get something different. They might look at the number one or number two, number three, whatever, and recognize it as a different number. Until they're taught, until they learn,
Mm.
it's going to be a mistake that they make. Exact same with anything physical. A child's still going to be learning. I mean, even us as adults, we still learn every day.
Mm. Mm.
The children are going to be learning so much more at that age. They'll realize that, okay, I'm going to try and climb that. That's that element of risk that they're taking, or in their head they might think they can't do it, but they won't know until they fail, or they make a mistake. And then that's where we come in as practitioners, educators, to try and shift that failure to, let's make it work. Another example, this isn't a risk-free example, but this last week I've been doing lots of, like, with the conversions in rugby, the
Mhm.
children have been balancing their rugby balls on top of a cone. The amount of times this week that I've heard, Josh, I can't do it, is just, honestly, I'd be a millionaire if I had a pound for every time. But I've changed that whole mind frame of, I've stopped the session, and I'll say, look, guys, stop telling me that you can't do it. Let's change it to, I can't do it yet. Let's think about
Right.
what we need to do to try and change that. And that's just an example from rugby, but you can literally associate that to any other element that a child is going to do, not just physically, but in life. So I think it's just important to understand, yeah, we might bubble wrap the children a little bit too much, but they have to make mistakes. They have to fall over to learn. I mean, my 3-year-old is probably one of the biggest drama queens you will meet. She falls over, it's tears, tantrums, and I'm trying to build that in with her. It's not easy, but it's being part of that community, and having that resilience, and watching other people. If a child sees another child try and do something, and they look at them thinking, oh, I want to try that, and even that is improvement within themselves as well.
Yeah, and I think, when we break that down, really, we're talking about the characteristics of effective learning there, aren't we? About keep trying and having a go and overcoming kind of difficult situations and challenges. And I suppose it's empowering those practitioners, which you touched on earlier, about empowering those practitioners to foster a growth mindset within those children. Like you said, it's not that you can't do it, it's just that you can't do it yet,
Yeah.
or that you won't do it, you will do it eventually. So I think that empowerment of the practitioners is something maybe practitioners feel a little bit unsure how to take it to the next level, or practitioners maybe worry about the risk, for example. So I think it's really important that we empower those practitioners, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's another. I mean, there's lots of barriers that we can look at, and we can say that, or we'll say barriers. The unkind word on that is excuses.
Mm.
That we would say there's lots. I mean, weather is a massive thing as well. Like, we want to try and get the children outside, however, the weather doesn't allow it. It could be staffing. We know that there's so many nurseries that are struggling with staffing at the moment. There might be just stress levels going on crazy in the rooms. And I've been there. I've been within it, and I've seen it. I know exactly what it's like. And I think it's just managing all of those things, and then taking a step back, and then realizing, actually, what are we mainly doing here? What is our main priority? And it's always going to be the child. So it's not as simple as me just saying that, because, like I said, I understand. I've been there, and I've worked in nurseries. I've done many years where I've had to be practitioner, room leader, whatever it might be. So I understand the struggles that are there, but it's just making sure that we can find time within all these stresses that happen, within all these barriers or these excuses, to remember that the child has to come at the heart of everything that we do. So just, yeah, having that growth mindset, being confident, and then, it's crazy because I shouldn't be saying this at all, but actually just enjoying being around the children and just having fun with them. I think that's the thing that keeps me going every day. Is I come home and I'm flat out, and I've got 2 kids of myself, so it's harder for me when I come home to look after my own children, because I
Mm.
spend all day being super, super bubbly, super positive, and super happy, for the children, because we want to try and make them have fun. And I think it's a good mentality to have. And if we can shift that, the practitioners feeling that particular way, then the children will also respond and have that. And it just makes it a nice rounded kind of experience for everyone.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something really, really important there that a lot of discussion is going on about at the moment, which is, the importance of play in its simplest form, whether that's physical play, whether that's any kind of play within the YFS. There's so much, pressure on kind of just schoolifying everything within early years, I suppose. And in its simplest form, physical development is just about being free, about moving to how your body feels and how you want to move it and how it makes you feel, how it makes your body feel, I suppose. So I think, there's real elements of structured and unstructured play within physical development. And I think both are equally important.
Yeah, and I think that is where a big difficulty comes in, is how much structure do you put in with unstructured? And I think that's probably the blurred line. Is a lot of practitioners may feel like, oh, we shouldn't be doing anything too structured. We've got to let the kids just play. But I think there's a massive balance, and for me personally, the beginning, my sessions, I break them down into like quarters. So I have my main introduction bit, which is quite structured. We have the children there, we're talking. I try and make that as fun as possible. We have our stories that we read, we introduce our characters. If it's a Monday, I'll ask them how their weekend was. If it's World Book Day, I'll talk about all their costumes. We have that personal bit. Then we have our warm-up games, which is very playful, very like fun and engaging. Then we have our main bulk of our lesson. That's a bit more structured again. I'll teach a skill. We'll do a lot of learning. And then the last quarter of the lessons, the last 10 minutes of the lesson is all free play. I don't get involved. I put music on. I let the children experiment with all the equipment that we've been having that day. And it's up to them what they do. And I think that's a need that, for me, it doesn't all have to be structure. A lot of companies that come into nurseries that I've seen will just do like a full half an hour of just structure, and it's getting the children standing behind a cone, doing this, doing that. And the children are fine to do that for a very small period of time before it gets boring. And that's what I learned. I mean, I've made the mistake before. I've tried to do too much structure and just lost the children completely. Even a lesson I had this week, just gone, I tried to introduce a game, which was fine. The game started, and then the children just got bored. It was one of those days with a group that's normally very, very good as well. They're normally very engaged. They just got bored. So I tried to switch it up, change it around again. And by that point, they pretty much had just gone. Their heads were just all over the place. We were out in their garden. They just wanted to go off and play. So I decided, instead of trying to fight it, let's just cut it there. We'll get all the equipment out and we'll just let them play. Because at the end of the day, if we can't get that structure in, then yes, the importance of play will override that. However much structure you can fit in, whether it be just a tiny little bit to start with, then that builds in, and then you can still have the element of structure and you can have unstructured. And that's the way that I approach our our babies and our toddler sessions as well.
Yeah.
Our babies, no structure at all whatsoever. That's just familiarity, environment, opportunity, exploration, imaginative stuff. So with the babies, don't worry about that sort of structure. Toddlers, we can start to very, very slowly introduce little bits of structure here and there. So it might be little games that they've got to take turns, or it might be that they've got to kind of listen to a particular instruction. Even something as little as we're going on a bear hunt around the garden, just with the toddlers, that's following an instruction. That might not seem structure, but that is structure, because they're following a story, they're following a bit of kind of a routine, and then they're copying. And then once that's finished, they'll go off and just kind of do what they want. So it's just, I think it's learning how to slowly build in these little bits of structure, combine it with elements of play until the point of you've got that perfect happy balance. And then the children understand it as well. You feel more confident as a practitioner. So it doesn't have to be all in. It can just be drip fed in little by little.
Yeah.
Confidence then builds up. Understanding with the children then builds up. And then you've got just the perfect balance of what physical development and physical activity and play and structure and all of that should be.
Yeah, and I think That's a really, really lovely way of approaching it. And, your comment around play should override everything else is really crucial, particularly in the early years. And I don't think anyone would argue that, elements and little pieces of structure now and again are not important. It's important that children do have structure, and it is important that children do understand routine and expectation and rules. However, it's very important to follow that unique child again, isn't it? And really give that agency. So I think, we've spoken a lot about practitioners and the role of the practitioners and things like that. But I think, we only have those children for a short period of time of their day or half of the week. When they're in the care of the parents, sometimes I think that can be maybe a worry for people. Maybe parents don't have that deeper understanding, or perhaps parents have that worry about if they're doing enough, or are they kind of not sure how to approach it, and are they seen as a bad parent if they're not getting out and about every day, all day. So I suppose it's really supporting the narrative for all of the individuals involved, the parents and the practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm a parent myself. I've got a 7-year-old and I've got a 3-year-old. They've both been through nursery. I I find parenting way, way harder than looking after 20 children who aren't mine. And that's just, I think that's normal, and I think that's life. And I think being a parent is one of the hardest things you can do, but obviously it's one of the most rewarding things, and one of the best things in life. But it comes with its challenges. And I've been there. My children are, they're so busy in their general days. I mean, my 3-year-old's at nursery 5 days a week, until 4 o'clock every day. When she comes home, it's a battle to try and keep her awake. So we need to keep her busy and stimulated. My 7-year-old is the definition of a Duracell battery. She's charged in at night. She doesn't sleep. She just gets plugged in. She's non-stop, but we try and get her into clubs, and we try and get her into those things. The parent knows their children better than anybody, and no one can say anything different. You know your children, you know what they need, their needs and their wants and their desires and stuff. And it comes down to opportunity again. And I think even just taking a child out into a garden or an open space or a park or something, and just letting them kind of, almost like a dog. And I don't mean that in any bad way, but generally, if like taking a dog off a lead, just letting them go, letting them explore, letting them have fun. And then once they start to gain a love and a positive experience, we'll come more onto that positive experience again very soon. But once they've gained that positive experience, they'll want to do it. They'll have that desire, that need, that I want to go outside, I want to play. But again, to play devil's advocate, I do understand busy parents working to come home and to be able to have the time to do that. So I think it's not right for me to turn around and say, you must take your children outside, you must do this, you must do that, because it's never going to happen. And it's like saying, walk our children to school. I can't walk my kids to school because I have to take my eldest to breakfast club in the car. Then I've got to take my youngest to nursery in the car because they're so far away. Then I have to pick them up. So it's not always going to work. I think it's just finding opportunity where you can, and making the most of that opportunity. Getting them into clubs and social environments like soft plays or anything like that is a benefit. But I think it's not putting the pressure on too much to think we have to do this or we have to do that. It's taking a little step back, calming, and being like, right, what can we do? What opportunity can we give to try and make this child have a positive experience of movement? And I think that is the crucial key thing for all parents to stick with.
Yeah, and I think that touches really nicely onto something I was going to talk about, which is the role of the parent, I suppose, or the adult in being an active role model. And whilst we're not saying that it's a one size fits all for parents, for example, and parents are busy and they have full-time jobs and they may feel the pressure, those little elements that you can introduce in the day, whether it's instead of going to Tesco's in the car, we'll take a walk, instead of get in the car to school. We'll walk to the bus stop and get the bus, so it's a different experience. So I think, it's like you said, really fostering that positive experience with movement in so many different ways. And I think maybe a lot of adults, perhaps as children, maybe didn't have as much positive experiences with physical development. I'm sure if you speak to a lot of adults, they'll probably say PE was one of their most dreaded subjects because they probably didn't get a good experience at school, and it was all very enforced, and it was all very outcome driven, and it was all very much you do this way or you don't join in. So I think there's a real stigma still attached, isn't there?
If for anyone who has or hasn't seen the film Kes, if you have seen it, you'll probably know what I'm about to say. If you haven't, there's clips on YouTube you can get, and it's a very old school approach. It's a dated film, but it rings true to what many adults believe PE is, and that shorts pulled up higher to the waist, tight t-shirts and vests in a very, very cold environment, running laps around the pitch, being told to do this, do that, do this, do that. And it was military. It was so military. And I mean, I'm young enough I didn't go through any of that, but I still didn't have the most positive experience of PE when I was at school. I had lots of body confidence issues. I didn't like changing rooms. I hated the changing room vibes. I was at an all boys school as well, so it was very, very masculine as you was getting older as well, growing up in that environment. So I had not the best experience, which is funny because obviously PE teacher for myself, but I had not the best experiences. So yeah, we've all had experiences that probably haven't been great, which I think is probably the reason why our practitioners who are slightly older, maybe let's say, who don't feel like PE belongs because of what they've experienced, well, not necessarily PE, but movement itself and doing anything that might correlate to what PE was.
Yeah.
But for me, I think that's even more reason as to why we should be creating positive experiences for our children so that they don't have the same experiences that we had. I know for a fact that none of that sort of stuff happens anymore in the national curriculum from primary to secondary. There's so much more embedding going on. So we're learning not just from a physical, but the deeper aspects of physical activity and physical development. And even the children that can't do are still doing. Whether, maybe not physically, but they're doing something that's related to that activity, whether it be timing or starting a stopwatch or being part of it in some way. And I think that's what we have to start it as young as we possibly can. I mean, that's where early years PE was brought from. It's fostering that love for life from as early as possible, to prevent all of those stigmas that unfortunately still exist.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good point to kind of end the main discussion of the episode on, which is fostering the love of movement for life, really, in whatever way that is relevant for you, really. So I think finally, the takeaways that I've kind of really picked up from the discussion with you is just really supporting everybody, whether they're practitioners, whether they're parents and children, I suppose, to really understand the intentionality of physical development and the nuances that go within that, and how it's not a one size fits all tick box. It's such a vast, open forum of movement, whether that's climbing, crawling, dancing, jumping, actual structured sports. So I think really understanding kind of the potential of expanding your knowledge of physical development and the opportunities you can provide to your children are going to be amazing.
Yeah. And I think it is, to round it off really nicely, I think it's the role of the educator and the practitioner to be able to understand that child and what can we do for that child to give them opportunity, give them experience, and give them the best start they possibly can in life.
Yeah, and that's the goal, isn't it? For everything that we do with children in early years, it's giving those children not just the most vulnerable children, but any child in the world the best start in life. And I think we've really kind of picked apart what role physical development has within that. So thank you, Josh, for being part of the podcast. And thank you to all of those who are listening or watching. Our listeners, as I said, can find Josh's article on the Voice of Early Childhood website, and the link will be in the episode description. For more episodes and articles in this series, please visit our Men in Early Childhood page. The link is also in the episode description. Thanks very much, Josh.
Thank you, mate.